Hello, I'm Natasha Chilingarian.
And I'm Michael Ogden. Welcome to Shared Accounts with CU Times. This month on the pod, we are talking about the tech landscape facing credit unions. And today, we're taking on the ominously exciting issue of artificial intelligence. The hip people call it AI, I think. Coming up, we'll be discussing credit unions and AI with Lamont Black, who's the Associate Professor of Finance, Director of DePaul DBA program at DePaul University down in Chicago, and who's also a Filene Fellow at Filene Research Institute. Really smart guy. Had a great conversation. Stay tuned for that. First up, let's take a breather from this week. I'm tired. You're probably tired. Let's check in with Natasha. Hey, Ann.
Hey, Michael.
Can I point out something very quickly?
Sure.
I realized I brought in the behind the scenes newsroom into our discussion with Lamont. I was calling you N, and that's
Oh,
just
yeah, I
a
didn't even notice because you
uh,
just call me that all the time, and I wasn't even thinking, why are you saying that like in front of an audience?
so everybody now knows internally I call you N, you call me M. It's just
It's just
I think
easy.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's just easy, lazy texting, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask Natasha, as we kind of do these taking a break things, what'd you watch this past week?
Well, so I'll tell you what I've been watching more than anything, and this is not a traditional movie or TV show type of watch, but it is a 24-hour live webcam of these two bald eagles in Big Bear Lake, California. And
Oh
so Big
man,
Bear, I know it's kind of silly, but it has become an obsession. And they've been so big in the news lately. So some of our listeners might even know what I'm talking about. It's this couple, their names are Jackie and Shadow, and there's this solar powered webcam that's up there on their nest. They are the cutest things ever. And it's funny because I never thought about bald eagles. I mean, I'm an animal lover, but I always thought of them as just being kind of scary or not very appealing, but I am obsessed now. They are so sweet. And so what's happening now with them is they have 3 eggs and they are about to hatch like any day now. And so we get to see that happen in real time. And I have been watching. I will be putting it back on the second we hang up from this podcast.
that's
So
adorable.
yes,
I love that. Hopefully we can put that link in the show notes or something.
that would be fun. Yeah. So what have you been watching?
Very quickly, I watched two things I want to point out. One is a terrible thing. Don't watch this.
Okay.
I put on the Nicolas Cage version of the Wicker Man movie. It came out in 2006.
Oh,
Do
okay.
not watch it. It is garbage. It is terrible. Watch the 1973 version. It is so much better.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was a second version. It's like,
This is the worst acted thing I've ever seen. The writing's terrible. The
oh,
editing is bad. Anyway, second thing, I hadn't seen this since it came out in theaters when I was a kid, but I watched The Dead Zone. It came
oh,
out in 1983.
oh.
Yeah, Stephen King book turned into a movie.
Yeah, no,
Christopher
love anything
Walken.
Stephen King. Okay, I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, it's so good. It's
Oh,
it's
nice.
very 80s. It's
Huh.
great.
Awesome. All right, well, that is going on the list for sure. I'm a sucker for anything Stephen King.
Yeah. All right. So we probably should get into this discussion though, but I wanted to first ask, since we're talking about AI, what's your relationship with AI?
I'm not one of those people that jump right on the Chat GPT bandwagon. I tried it out a
Sure.
little bit. I don't know, maybe I'm just old-fashioned. I don't feel that maybe I'm just used to Googling things the old-fashioned way. I haven't really caught on with that. I would say, when you mention AI, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind, and this is very silly, but BuzzFeed puts out all these kind of silly, hilarious articles, and the premise will be like, here is a sandwich to represent every state in the country according to AI. And then you look at it
Uh-huh.
and it's just so, I don't know, it's bizarre, but it's also really funny and kind of interesting,
hmm
intriguing.
So what are you, a Reuben? What kind of sandwich are you?
Am I? Oh, I don't know. I didn't ask it what sandwich I
Oh,
was.
okay. All right, great.
But yeah, from each state, it will have, or they'll have, like a person. This is what someone would look like in the
Yeah.
1970s from Ohio. And it's like, I don't know, it's just
Okay.
interesting. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think more of kind of for entertainment value, I would say, is my relationship with it at this point.
Can I point out, you were talking about ChatGPT. I want to point out to our readers, our audience, our listeners, we have a hard rule at CU Times. We do not use ChatGPT or anything like
Right.
that. That is just editorially, we don't touch it. I just want everybody to know that. There are publications that use it quite a bit. We
Sure.
do not.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. No, we still believe that we have the higher value at this point. But, we talked about all this with our guest today, Lamont Black. We kinda talked a little bit about how, on one hand, people might think, "Oh, AI is coming for your job," but on the other hand, he talks about, "No, it's actually going to, like, help enhance your job." So I thought that
Yeah,
was pretty interesting. Anyway, well, let's go ahead and get into our interview with Lamont. Another thing he mentioned that was really interesting is that this is just not the year for credit unions to sit back and watch what happens with AI. It's the year to take some action.
yeah,
He kind of compared AI and ChatGPT to what was happening in the early days of the internet.
yeah.
That's kind of where we're at with it. So we had a very good conversation with him. Very excited to have him on. All of this is coming up next.
Thank you, Ann, and listeners. Welcome to Shared Accounts with CU Time. Hey, listeners. I have some very important information I want to share with you. It's no surprise that our industry is seeing transformative change on a daily basis. And let's be honest, it's tough finding the time to sift through the mountains of information out there. That's why Credit Union Times launched its State of the Industry Town Hall webcast series. We started a few years ago during the pandemic, and it's been great. These panel discussions provide an interactive dialogue on the topics that are top of mind to us and to you, and include industry experts weighing in to share their perspectives. So I host these things, and we have a blast. Honest conversations, we take live questions from the audience. And so our very first State of the Industry is going to focus on partnerships between credit unions and fintechs. It's going to be held on Tuesday, June 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I highly encourage you to attend and participate with me and the panel. I promise you it's going to be a lively discussion. Go to cutimes.com/webcasts to register. Again, that's going to be held on Tuesday, June 11th, 2 p.m. Eastern. Sign up at cutimes.com/webcasts.
Okay, AI and credit unions. Let's jump in. Joining us in the virtual studio today is Filene Fellow and Associate Professor of Finance at DePaul University, Lamont Black. Welcome, Lamont. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Hi,
Yeah.
Lamont. We're all in 3 different locations in the country, so it's really cool that we can all chat right here. So, Natasha, get us going.
All right. Just kind of wanted to start off with some background for the audience. Just on Filene, we work with Filene quite a bit, so we're very, very familiar with them. But Lamont, what does it mean to be a fellow for Filene Research Institute? I know I've seen that term quite a bit, but could you just kind of tell us briefly what that role entails?
Sure. So, Filene, as a research institute, works with academics doing research related to credit unions. So, there's a number of fellows, and they've got a rotating cycle of centers. Each fellow is working with a center doing research on a particular area. And I joined as a fellow this last summer for the Center around the Credit Union of the Future. Just seemed like a natural fit for me, given the work that I'd already been doing with credit unions. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
All right, so let's get into the meat of the issue here. How have credit unions been doing so far when it comes to their use of AI?
Yeah, so I think AI is such an important topic to be talking about. And I think credit unions have certainly started that conversation. I've noticed that just this year that a lot of credit union boards, credit union leadership teams are starting to raise the topic, reach out. Some of them have reached out to me to get my input. And, I'm not setting off any alarms in the sense of saying, that you've already missed the boat. I think AI is clearly still an emerging technology, and I think every industry is trying to ramp up, but credit unions definitely need to be getting up to speed. I wouldn't say that this is the year to just sit around and watch. It's certainly the year to be figuring out what position you want to take on this, because I spent a lot of time over the last 2 years talking to credit unions about crypto and blockchain, and I still love that stuff, but a lot of times I showed up as the guy talking about like the future and how would this change the nature of payments. And I still believe that that potential is there, but I don't think it's going to be right around the corner. Whereas I would say, the tools are here and there are things you can be doing today. And so this is certainly the year to be trying to figure that out.
So, to follow up on the question, in what ways have credit unions been leveraging it in the past few years?
AI is a kind of a category, a concept, really. And within that, there are other things like machine learning. Now, there's a lot of talk about generative AI, natural language processing, large language models. And so it's important to kind of differentiate somewhat among those different areas because I would say, AI, especially machine learning, has been around for a number of years, and I'm aware of a number of credit unions that have already been using some of those tools. I think, in particular, for instance, in the area of lending, if you think about how do we automate loan underwriting, there's certainly rules that can be applied. Think about like above or below X credit score. But if you want something that's a little more advanced than that and something that can also learn as it goes, which is what machine learning does, then that's something that has been used already, and there's vendors providing that type of service. And I think chatbots is an example. We've kind of seen an evolution over the years of obviously moving from phone to also into text and other types of digital chat. And we've gone from phone trees to chat bots. And a lot of that has been very formulaic and very frustrating, but gradually it has started to improve. And I think some credit unions had already tried to go that route in terms of their digital channels and how to serve their members.
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess it sounds like they're not very far. Like if you look at the industry as a whole, would you say that credit unions are still just in the very like exploratory stage with AI in general, just overall?
Yes, for sure. And I think every industry, as I said, is still kind of gradually moving forward. Like if you look at other areas, even in finance, like in investing, like here in Chicago, we have a lot of investment firms that are doing high frequency trading. I mean, artificial intelligence, machine learning has been applied in high frequency trading, algorithmic trading for a number of years.
Hmm.
But if you think about financial services that are more like banking, then I think it's been a little slower to take hold. I think some of the larger commercial banks that have the large tech budgets and the staffing, they've been exploring this earlier, and they've also been trying to develop some of their own models internally. But when I look at other regional banks, community banks, I don't think credit unions are behind in that sense. It's just that this really has been, really since ChatGPT put generative AI on the public map and said, like, look, this is a real, usable, user friendly technology that created this kind of arms race. And some people refer to it as the AI gold rush. And you could think of that as just kind of a Silicon Valley type of phenomenon, but that's exactly how the internet started. And this is, I would argue, similar to that kind of phenomenon in the late 1990s, where people were seeing all the investment, but still kind of sitting back and watching to see, okay, well, what's the real use case? How do I get a return on investment? But this is not the time to just be idly standing by. A lot of credit unions talk about being fast followers. In the world of AI, things are changing by the week and by the month. And so you can't say, well, we'll revisit this with the board at our next strategic planning. That's not going to cut it in 2024.
Right. So then I guess what would you say is most realistically coming next for credit unions in terms of their use of AI? And so, not necessarily like what you think they should be using it for, what they would be best served to use it for, but what use cases do you see most likely to be coming next for credit unions, just looking at the pace they've been on so far?
Yes, in terms of what I've been seeing in the credit unions that I'm talking to about AI, I think, first of all, there's a shift in mindset in how they think about their data, because I think historically, credit unions have thought about data just as their core and anything that they can extract from their core. And data in the world of big data is much bigger than that. An easy way to segment that is to think about structured data versus unstructured data. So anything that looks like a spreadsheet is going to be structured. Anything that looks more like a document or a audio transcript is going to be unstructured data. And I think credit unions are starting to wake up to the fact that they have all this unstructured data, in particular, like from their contact center, all the audio transcripts from different calls that they're taking and member servicing. What can they learn from those audio transcripts? That's something that we can now do with natural language processing and even generating interpretation and summarization of those documents. And so I think credit unions are going to be working on that. Related to that, there is the knowledge base. Every credit union has some repository of different documents, policies, procedures, products, and services. And they all have some sort of search system to try and query that knowledge base. But I think large language models are going to radically transform the way that we access knowledge and then use that knowledge. And so I think that's going to empower employees. And I think the idea of chatbot is gradually going to transition into a broader sense of virtual assistant. There's already a number of vendors that are providing that type of service to think about how do you help your members self-serve and do it more efficiently? How do you help your employees serve your members by accessing the knowledge base more efficiently? So there's a number of things that are already on the market that I think credit unions can be exploring even now.
Lamont, you're talking about efficiencies there. What, in your opinion, are some of the best AI use cases that can actually help credit unions improve operational efficiencies as well as potentially member experience?
Yeah, I think those two phrases, operational efficiency and member experience, are a good way of categorizing it. So if you kind of, in the world of banking, sometimes people talk about like back office and front office. I do think back office is a good place to start. Some credit unions are hesitant to put something out that's member facing because it's still new technology. You don't want to have something that goes wrong right away that would be touching a member. And so operational efficiency, in my mind, often comes down to automation. And I've started using the phrase that AI is the new automation. And so if you think about recent history of fintech is very much about how do we do things faster and cheaper, typically through some automation of a business process. And algorithms are basically an automation of business decision making. But AI, what makes it so powerful is it's not just rules based, that it can learn, that it can start to address context and conditions, create more nuanced decision making. And so, for instance, in the area of loan underwriting, if you put something that's totally rules based, it's going to give that automatic yes and automatic no, but you're going to still end up with a pretty fat gray area of trying to make decisions in the middle. And I think as AI gets better and better, that uncertainty in the middle is going to get narrower and narrower. And so these models are really designed to improve over time, not just based on programmers getting better or smarter. It's the computers themselves getting better and smarter. That's really what differentiates AI. It's not us telling the computers what to do. It's the computers figuring some of this out for themselves. And so that's definitely going to improve automation on the back end. And then on the front end, think about how much AI has changed customer experience over the last few years. I would say all of us have experienced that in the way that we interact with Amazon or Netflix or Spotify. And there's a lot of awkwardness when we realize, with data collection and giving up certain privacy, but we also benefit a lot from that convenience. The fact that these different platforms do know our preferences. And so when they make recommendations, those recommendations are good and they can get a little ahead of us in thinking, anticipating what we're going to be interested in next. And so member experience for credit unions can clearly benefit from this type of trend as well. I like to use the phrase personalization, which is very common in data science, and it's really about understanding the person's data history to predict future behavior. And I think credit unions have an immense amount of data, and so if they can more personalize their member experience, that means it's going to customize and tailorize to make it that much better. It's not just about a warm, friendly face when you walk into the branch. I'm not anti-branches, but the more member experience goes digital, the more we're going to need AI to make that a personal experience.
Yeah, got to appeal to that younger generation as well. Good point.
So Lamont, now this all sounds wonderful and like a great opportunity for credit unions, just talking about all the things AI can do to improve things. But I'm sure there's areas where they can get it wrong and there's risks obviously involved with AI. So what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes credit unions could make when they're trying to adopt a new tool that's AI driven or even just a strategy around their use of AI and how they're going to utilize it? What would you advise them not to do?
Well, I think one thing to be careful of right now is FOMO. There's so much talk about AI and so much concern about getting left behind that I think some credit unions might be tempted to try and jump ahead or even leapfrog and say, we do AI, and they're just going to kind of slap something on or roll something out. And this is not something you want to rush because, we all know stories of AI, ChatGPT, Bard, different chatbots that are out there that have made some embarrassing mistakes. And you want to be careful about anything like that being associated with your brand. And so you want to have a strategy, thinking about a governance policy. How do you want to govern AI as part of your organization to make sure that it is fitting with your mission, your values, and your goals? But I would say another big mistake that I'm concerned about is that some credit unions still view AI as like a vendor selection problem. That AI is not something we do, it's something that someone else does for us, and we just have to figure out who to partner with who can then provide us AI as a service. So I'm not anti partnerships. There's a lot of incredible AI providers in the market, some of them specifically for credit unions, and I think they have a very valuable role to play. But one of the beauties of AI is also that it lowers the barrier to these types of tools. If you think of AI basically as a language interface between humans and computers, early days of computing, telling a computer what to do was very hard, and you had to have very specialized skill sets. You basically had to have machine coding. You had to learn Fortran or COBOL. I can remember when I was a kid, like learning Pascal and C, like these early coding languages. And now you can think about coding having gotten easier, like Python, I think, is a pretty user-friendly coding language. But the beauty of AI is it can now even help you code. It basically is helping you use human language like English or Spanish or other languages to then interface with computer language to tell computers what you want and for the computer to tell you what it's done. And so some credit unions I work with have started using this term democratization, which I think is really great because it's how do we start getting these tools in the hands of our employees and figuring out how this can be empowering to our employees so that then they are using AI in their daily work to be more productive and serve the members even more effectively. And what's so, I think, great about that is now it's not just paying someone else to do it for us, which sometimes can just be like a black box of, well, you do AI, that sounds really cool, and the output looks really great, but I have no idea how this actually works. Whereas think about how many of us are now using ChatGPT just for even personal applications like a recipe or writing an email or a thank you letter. Well, many credit union employees are starting to use ChatGPT to write a marketing email or to summarize a meeting or things like that. These are tools that are now going to be showing up in everyday office productivity suites like Microsoft Copilot. And so I think credit unions should be figuring out how do we start training our employees on those tools so that they become AI empowered internally, not just trying to outsource this to someone else.
Lamont, you mentioned Microsoft Copilot. I think you mentioned Bard a couple of minutes ago because I want to talk about some risks very quickly. I think it was today that I read they were doing a new test. It was either of Copilot or Bard. I can't recall at this moment. But this new version that they were testing quickly took on a very aggressive personality that basically told them to go jump in a lake and just go away. So, kind of setting that up, this discussion that we're having, what are some of the risks that AI poses? Not to just tell you to go take off and don't bother me, but when it comes to ethics and just rules of the game for credit unions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think there's lots of stories out there of AI not just getting things wrong, like hallucination risk, but saying things that are even offensive or racist. And so these are all good examples of why you would not want to use AI as like a pure delegation mechanism of, okay, well, we're no longer going to do this. AI is going to do it entirely for us. Typically, you want some sort of combination of people and AI. A lot of AI is also prompt engineering, figuring out how to tell it what you want and how to work with it effectively. That's a skill in itself. And so AI is not just a tell you what you want it to tell you sort of technology. Part of generative AI is the act of creation. That's part of why, like when you give ChatGPT a prompt, it'll tell you one thing. You can give it the same exact prompt again, and it will tell you something slightly different because it's not rules based. And therefore, it's not controlled in the same way. It's not how you think about a calculator. If I hit 2 plus 2 and then the equal sign, I know it's going to give me 4. With generative AI, it will give you something that it thinks is the best idea, but may not always be what you think is the best idea. And so this is why I think this concern about AI replacing people is certainly legitimate. I do think as AI gets better and better, that we might see more and more of that, certainly in routine tasks that are kind of everyday and fairly simple. But for complex tasks that require emotional intelligence, that require some context, that require some interpersonal interaction, I don't think humans are going away anytime soon. And I think it's about this concept of human in the loop. How do we incorporate AI into what we're doing so that it can help us do the more computational aspects of our work, which then should free us up to do the more human aspects of our work? And so it's not either or, it's both and. And I think we certainly need to manage these risks. I'm not here to say that AI is a panacea and that it's all good. It's about kind of figuring out the narrow applications where it can be effective today, not stretching it too far. I would say some of those risks are when you try and use AI beyond what it's currently capable of. And so part of the educational process is figuring out, okay, given the state of technology, what can we use it for today? And then as you wait and see how the technology progresses, then you gradually start to expand those use cases into those more complicated areas.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. The concern around replacing people because, you're talking about, oh, well, AI could help you write like a marketing email.
Yeah.
That was actually a job I had. I was actually the marketing writer for a credit union. So what it made me think of was, gosh, well, I don't know, maybe I'd be concerned about incorporating it because maybe it's just going to lead to my job being taken away. So yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. It sounds like that needs to be made clear to people that when they're adopting it, it's not to replace them, but to enhance and to maybe create efficiency.
Yes. And I think credit unions would benefit themselves by doing a little more internal marketing with their staff. If you're going to start going down this AI adoption path, trying to include your staff people earlier rather than later, trying to help them understand why you're doing it, help get them involved, get their ideas, get them into brainstorming, listening sessions
Yeah.
so that they feel empowered, not sort of replaced. It's one thing to say, like, we want to be more efficient, but it's another thing to say, like, hey, we want to make your job better. Think about like all the grunt work that all of us do at some point in our days as part of our job. We might be knowledge workers working in the knowledge economy, but many of us have some aspect of our job that simply isn't that fun. And AI can often help with that part of your job. And so I think if credit unions can figure out how to incorporate these tools, train their employees to use these tools, I think employee satisfaction will go up, not down. It will help them feel like they are actually contributing more value using these tools to assist them.
Kind of helps them, right? Okay, so now a different topic that's, I mean, this is huge for all credit unions in general, not just related to AI, but, fraud and cybersecurity, constantly a concern. When it comes to AI and fraud or cybersecurity, it sounds like it's a double-edged sword. In one hand, AI could possibly help credit unions mitigate fraud. Then on the other hand, fraudsters are using AI to be more effective. They're able to mimic what someone sounds like in an business email compromise type of scheme. That's clearly an issue. So, can you kind of address that a little bit? How can AI help credit unions mitigate fraud? But then are you also worried about what it's doing in favor of the fraudsters?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's going to be both and it's going to be on both sides. And this arms race is not just to see, who can get ahead faster. It's also going to be good guys versus bad guys. And I've been at some credit union events where people have focused on the AI use cases that are more in the scary category, like deep fakes and other type of developments where it becomes hard to identify truth in an age where just about anything can be generated from some sort of data. And so AI has been used for fraud prevention in financial services for quite a while now. I would say a good example of that is credit card fraud. Not just Visa and MasterCard, but other card agencies figuring out how to do pattern recognition, anomalies based on previous behavior to figure out what types of transactions do not fit with those patterns. And so AI, as you said, can be very useful for preventing fraud. But another example of like generative AI being used for bad, my coworker, or I guess co-author, John Best, who was on a recent credit union webinar with me about AI, he made the point about like phishing emails and thinking about, how much better those phishing emails are going to get now that generative AI can be used to write that text, to even generate images like logos and other assets that they might be using to try and deceive the user. And it's just, I think, striking to me that as we get better at creating this content, there's going to be people using that for good and people using it for bad. But that doesn't mean that AI itself is bad. When I think about this topic, it reminds me of all the time I spent talking to credit unions about crypto, because you get into many of the same debates. It's like, well, is crypto just going to be used by criminals and drug lords? Well, some of them, yes. And, that is a problem. But crypto is a technology built on blockchain, and it can be used for a lot of other purposes as well as a digital currency. And so, with each of these emerging technologies, I think we're going to have the people who are using it for nefarious purposes. But I'm a believer in the more institutional adoption we have, the more economic value these tools are used for, the more that technology will advance on the commercial side to keep ahead of the criminal side. And I think if we just try to bury our heads and hope this goes away, then the criminals are going to be doing all the learning instead of us. And so we're going to be losing that type of cyber battle.
Right. Got to get ahead of that. Well, it's good to hear you're positive about it because the next question I wanted to ask you is what, if anything, I guess, scares you the most when it comes to the advancement of AI? And not just related to how it might impact credit unions, but just how AI might impact anything in the world or people. Is there anything that's keeping you up at night about it, or are you totally positive on this?
Yeah, I am not totally positive. I'm a big optimist. I think most people who get to know me get to see that pretty quickly. So I tend to like see the positive in things. But I read a lot of science fiction, and a lot of science fiction related to AI is very dystopian, and there's a lot of bad scenarios that can happen. And there's this term singularity, which is basically when the machines become smarter than us. And when you really start to think about how large language models, AI models in general, they get better with more data. Well, we are entering the era of big data already. Data is only going to increase. And as we produce more and more data, these algorithms are just going to get smarter and smarter. And so the rate of increase in human intelligence from one generation to the next is relatively slow. I think the rate of increase in machine intelligence from one generation to the next is relatively high. And so at some point, there is going to be a crossing of the two. And so that's where you get into this term general intelligence or artificial general intelligence, AGI. And that makes me nervous, because Isaac Asimov, many other people have written about what can happen in that scenario. And I hope that it's peaceful coexistence, but the war of humans and machines is certainly one possibility.
On that really happy sentence there, just one quick question, then we're going to move into a much more fun personal stuff here in a second. So that keeps you up at night, but what are you most excited about when it comes to AI right now?
Again, most people can get stuck in this discussion about artificial general intelligence, which is this like long-term future and all these dark scenarios. And I would say if it's credit union boards or credit union leadership teams, those can be interesting conversations to have over a beer, but those are not the type of conversations that you want to be focusing on when you're talking about strategic planning and what you're doing over this next year. The narrow AI is, in contrast to general AI, is also applied AI, which is this is a tool. What can we do with this tool? And so I think every credit union should be trying to figure out how to pick up these tools and start working with them. And that's part of that's getting these tools like chatbots, like ChatGPT, like Microsoft Copilot, Copilot 365, getting some of these tools into the hands of their employees and just seeing what they can do with it. And so, as an educator, I think what I am most excited about is how this changes the nature of human learning and human productivity. So much of the narrative is around what AI is going to take from us as people, taking away our jobs, taking away our authenticity, and things like that. But I view it so much as a complement rather than a substitute of, how can I start to use these tools to do things that I never dreamed I would be able to do? And so when I see my kids at home taking videos on my phone and then using an AI app to create these video compilations that are just so fun and energetic and there's music to them. And I think, how did you create that video? And they say, oh, there's an app for doing that. And it's AI behind the app. But they are now able to do things that there's no way I could have ever done that as a kid. And when I think about the office worker of today, it's no longer just how do I do Excel from this very manual way of creating tables and doing VLOOKUPs, and I have to learn every function and every command. Now I can use English language to tell the computer what I want, and now I can create crazy data visualization. It's going to change the way that people interact with data. And I think credit unions will become data-driven organizations in the way that they never have. And AI is what's going to make that possible.
So my takeaway there is that Lamont Black is all for getting rid of Excel. I'm 100% on board. So we're going to move into the final part. These are questions all about you, and take it away.
Okay, well, this question I'm very excited to ask because I'm also a huge sci-fi fan. And you mentioned, Lamont, your webinar that you did with Filene recently. I actually watched that last week to kind of get to know you a bit before we had our call. And in that, you mentioned that you were like a tech kid growing up, that you read a lot of sci-fi. So what is your favorite science fiction book of all time?
Well, so I would say my genre of choice is called cyberpunk. And so I would
Oh,
say like
nice.
Neuromancer by William Gibson. I also love Snow Crash, Neil Stevenson, and Ready Player One is a great one that
Sure.
came out just a few years ago. The one I read most recently that I would highly recommend related to AI is All Systems Red by Martha Wells,
Hmm.
part of the Murderbot Diary series. And it is AI done in such a human way that it was profound.
Adding that to my list as we speak.
Very good. What's your favorite science fiction movie or TV show? Is it Ready Player One then?
Actually, I like the book a lot more than the movie for that one.
I think everybody did, yeah.
Yeah, partly because I'm a dad with kids. Star Wars, I grew up on, and now like Mandalorian, all that
Sure.
stuff. We watch a ton of that. But one of the movies that we watched this last year was The Creator, which I thought was an excellent movie. It didn't get that much attention in the theaters, but
Uh-huh.
it's Ridley Scott, and it basically highlights this nuance of people and machines coexisting and whether we can coexist or whether we'll ultimately end in some sort of global war. And I thought they did a nice job of kind of playing out some of those different scenarios.
Very cool. I'm going to put that one on my list.
Michael's the movie guy. I'm the reader of the group.
I can barely read. Yeah. So,
Okay, so Lamont, you're currently based in Chicago, but I know you also lived in Washington, D.C. in the past with your past position with the Federal Reserve. So I was curious, which of those two cities do you like living in better and why?
Well, I don't like to play favorites, but I would say what I love about DC is largely its location. I'm a huge fan of the Mid Atlantic. I loved being
mhm.
close to the coast, Chesapeake Bay. My wife and I are very outdoorsy, so the Shenandoah Mountains. There was a lot to enjoy there. But what I love about Chicago is people call it the Great American City for a reason. It just has a little bit of everything. It's also kind of got that down to earth industrial spirit. I grew up in the Rust Belt, across like Cleveland, Ohio, cities like that. And so Chicago very much feels like home to me. And I just love the diversity of people and diversity of ideas that you can find here.
Very cool. Nice. And then also, you're obviously a college professor, and it looks like you attended Stanford in the 90s for your undergrad. I'm curious now, as a professor, when you look back at your college experience, did you have a favorite professor or a favorite class at Stanford?
Yeah, there were points in my life where I sometimes wondered if I made a mistake in what I did. I even had someone in an interview similar to this when they heard I was a business school professor and my major in college was modern thought and literature. She said, "Well, what were you thinking?" But I loved my education because for me, the classes on philosophy, on literary theory, these were my favorites. And I can even remember I took a class in the theater school called Narratives of Identity that was very much about technology and humanity and the intersection of the two. And so even today, so I sometimes use the term futurist to describe myself. But when I use that term, part of what I almost mean is like philosopher. Like I love to just kind of step back and look at who we are, where we are today, and where is all this headed. Because as much as I want to encourage people to think about like specific technologies and what they can do with them, I love the big ideas and to think about what's good, what's bad, and how do we move together in the right direction.
So we're going to focus on your professorship just a little bit more here and then we'll be done. At DePaul University, you have some notable alumni. They include Gillian Anderson, love her, Judy Greer, great, John C. Riley, Lauren Lapkus, and Paul Danilo. Two questions. How often do you all hang out together?
Not enough.
Eh, okay, I'm
Oh,
kidding. So, who of those people who I all adore, I think they're all very funny, very talented, who would you want to hang out with?
Well, I would be happy to hang out with any of them. It's for me, part of what I love about DePaul is the alumni network. It's been fun for me to be at different speaking engagements and people come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, I went to DePaul. I'm a Blue Demon." Or they also like to, especially some of the older folks who still remember Ray Meyer and the DePaul basketball teams back in the day. when they were just a dominant force here in Chicago. I think those were kind of the glory days for our sports teams. I view DePaul as being a school that is urban because we're right downtown, and also just very much bridging theory and practice. That's part of why I came here, is because we're not an ivory tower. We're not just kind of out in the cornfields thinking about academic theory. We are very much trying to come up with real world solutions. And so my students are super scrappy. They are often working just as they're going to school, and they're trying to figure out what works and what can be applied. And so, yeah, I love the DePaul alumni because all of them have that same spirit.
Lamont, very quickly, how can our listeners connect with you? What's a way to find you out there?
Well, my personal website is lamontblack.com, and a bunch of my resources are there, some of the things that I've written. You can also find my contact information there if you want to reach out to me. And then I'm also active on X or Twitter, Lamont K. Black, and then also on LinkedIn. That's probably where I do my most posting, and so I'm happy to connect with anybody there.
Fantastic.
Well, Lamont Black, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Loved it.
Yeah. And for all of our listeners, please subscribe to Shared Accounts with CU Times, anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever. You know how this works. And if you'd like to rate us, we'd love your feedback. Also, for those of you with questions or comments, you can feel free to email me over at nchilingarian@cutimes.com, or you can email Michael at mogden@cutimes.com.
That's right. Also, if you want some data-driven details on DEI and credit unions, subscribe to our executive briefing at cutimes.com/subscribe. In March, we're going to be exploring this issue inside our executive briefing. It's only available to subscribers. A new topic each month. Check it out at cutimes.com/subscribe to get that executive briefing. Thank you so much to our producer, Zach Nyheisel, for coming in today. Join us again next week for more Shared Accounts. Until then, thanks for listening.